For the most part, the dates in this unit are easy. The 17th century or the 1600s is a Baroque era. Mannerism, however, complicates the story a little. Mannerism is mostly a phenomenon of the last half, even the last third of the 16th century. But Pontormo's descent from the cross is earlier in the century, and the College Board wants you to know that. I thought that was a difficult question, which is why I've been giving you the strong hint that you need to look up the answer. So again, almost all of the major works we studied in this unit, except for the Mannerist painting and sculpture, date from the 17th century or the 1600s, and again, that should make your life easier. You've seen this review slide before, although I've edited a little. Baroque art displays movement and creative tension. Its sculpture often spirals around an axis. Buildings, sculptures, and paintings are all produced on a grandiose scale and sometimes with really over-the-top decoration. Remember those ceilings? Painters love to compose with diagonals, sometimes crossing diagonals. Think particularly of Judith's Slang Holofernes. These diagonals often reach from the foreground to the background. Contrasts of light and dark contributed to the sense of art as theater. Remember that term theater. It's very applicable to Baroque art. And of course, we have two different terms for that contrast of light and dark that show up in this unit, and I trust you know them. Spaces are designed to produce a theater for art, and art becomes multimedia. Think, for example, of the chapel that houses the Ecstasy of St. Teresa. Bernini, in particular, is theatrical. The compositions, likewise, are often open. What that means is the action is not really fully contained by the frame, especially in the foreground where the viewer is standing. Action seems to be ready to spill out to the viewer, right into our laps. Okay, I know this is going to break everyone's heart. No essay on this unit test. Your Unit 9 essay already has 19 general multiple choice questions and 94 image-based questions. That's going to keep you busy enough. The Unit 10 exam, by contrast, will be all essay, and I will include at least one Baroque essay on that exam. Okay, there are 19 general multiple choice questions, and unlike the image-based questions, I'm pretty much handing them to you here. Actually, I've really ended up handing you more of the image-based questions than I'd originally intended, my soft heart, etc. And you should be able to have picked up most of the trickier questions during your PowerPoint presentation. So these should be self-explanatory. I do recommend that you pay special attention to that last question, since variations show up on the image-based test as well. What difference does it make that the Dutch Republic was largely Protestant? What difference does it make in terms of patronage and in terms of the subject matter of the art? Now, note that for the most part, the image-based questions you will encounter on the AP test will not identify the works. They will if they're obscure or if you really will not have encountered it, although sometimes you'll get a work which is so obviously by an artist that you should know that you will be expected to identify the artist even if the work does not show up in the major art history textbooks. For your last three multiple choice unit tests, this one, Unit 11 and Unit 12, I am not going to label works on the review podcast. I'm going to follow the same approach as you'll have in the AP test. If a work is obscure or not in your edition of the textbook, I'll identify it. Otherwise, you're going to need to look this up and know these. I also gave you the artists and titles for the Unit 9 PowerPoint, so you should have a pretty complete list. So by now you know the drill. For all of these images, I'm not going to keep repeating this. You need to know the artist, the date, usually just which century. The Pontormo is an exception. The art historical period, and often the patron and or location. Usually, by the way, the location question will be generic rather than specific, a chapel, a palace, etc. Then you want to think about what makes a work significant in art history. What will the College Board likely hone in on? Again, if I think they're acting diabolically, I'll give you a break. Unfortunately, you won't get that break on the AP test. But you will have had, I hope, some insight into their petty little minds. Otherwise, you're going to need to do a little more work on your own for this and subsequent tests. After all, I will not be able to preview your AP test questions. Like you, I'm just guessing. By the way, I think we should set up some kind of class betting pool about the images that will appear on your AP exam. No big stakes, of course, but it would be fun. You've already heard me guess Las Meninas because it hasn't shown up as an image-based question in the last decade and a half. Here, at any rate, for starters, is a painting you must know. Who are these people? What's going on? Etc. By the way, something I'm not sure that the section of the video we got to talked about. So I just note that that oddly spotlit woman in the foreground on the left is actually Saskia, Rembrandt's wife, who had just recently passed away. Which is kind of interesting, or I think she had. She would die rather young. At any rate, he was extremely fond of her and painted her often. I may be wrong that she was dead at this point. So what's going on here? What is this painting? What does the patron want from the painting? How does it fit in with other works by this artist? So I told you in my first Mannerism lecture that I doubted the College Board would ask you to distinguish between Mannerist and Baroque sculpture. I was wrong. So know which of the two this is, why this sculpture was important in the history of art, how was it composed, and here the answer is going to be largely the same for Mannerist and Baroque sculpture. Finally, what earlier artistic period did Mannerist and Baroque sculptors admire and emulate? You probably noticed that the College Board loves to ask you about women artists, and there are more important women artists in the Baroque period than we've encountered thus far. This work is The Proposition by Judith Leister. I'm giving you that identification because it isn't in your textbook. Also, you did not hear a classroom presentation from Riley, but his PowerPoint is available on Google Drive, and I recommend you go and look at it. You may also want to do a little research into this artist and her painting online. There are usually good Wikipedia entries on all of these. Obviously, I kind of hate to encourage Wikipedia, but it's a short and quick and easy way of getting information, and I admit I use it myself. So what's going on here? What other artists influence this artist? Whose work does hers resemble? How would you categorize this painting? I'm going to give you a huge hint. It is not a portrait. The woman is an unidentified model, not a patron who commissioned it. She's instead really a prop in the narrative. That should tell you the answer more or less, although the answer is not, interestingly enough, narrative. This is the same artist, but what kind of painting is this? This one's in your book. Does the painting on the easel suggest another painting whose work resembles hers? What does this painting signal about her ambitions? What does she care about? What point is she making about herself in this painting? Just gave you an answer to the first part of the question. How would she have been trained? Now, by the way, I think that was an unfair question on the previous AP test, since your textbook doesn't have an answer. And what I discovered as I hunted around is, as far as I could find out, art historians don't really know. At this point in history, almost all artists were trained as apprentices, not in art school. So artists were trained by other artists, which really pretty much gives you your answer. But, and this is important, usually women artists were trained by their fathers. Apparently her father was a brewer. So she was an exception. As I said, maybe you can find out how she was trained. If so, share it with the class. I'd be curious to know. Neither of these portraits is in your book. I'm surprised that the one on the left isn't, because it's probably the most famous of Frans Hal's paintings. It's his Laughing Cavalier. The one on the right is Rembrandt's portrait of Jan VI. This is one of those, I think, that the AP exam included because it's so obviously a Rembrandt that you should recognize that by looking at such a characteristic Rembrandt painting. Why did this kind of portraiture break out in Holland? And what other kinds of paintings did the Dutch enjoy? What similarities do you see in the two artists' styles? Pay special attention to their use of light and their brush strokes. Okay, this self-portrait doesn't actually show up on the exam, but questions about this artist's self-portraits do. So what do they reveal about this artist? And surely you recognize this guy, his unmistakable bulbous nose. Also the increasingly undefined boundaries of his later paintings, which made him very controversial. He was considered coarse and, in fact, had very difficult time selling his paintings later in life. I love his later paintings. And, in fact, I think in general they suit our more modern sensibilities. So, who was the extremely influential architect of this work? Where was this particular work built? What is it? What was the function of this building? And later on, not on this exam, but you're going to need to know what what architecture this particularly influenced. And I'll tell you right off the bat that this architect was extremely influential in America. Okay, this one's a huge College Board favorite. It shows up on 2 past AP tests that I have. Again, it's a woman artist. The College Board likes to give them their day in the sun. You remember the artist in the story, right? We started off our course with this. So think about the influences this work shows. Know where the story comes from. And by the way, quite specifically, where does it come from? And why, what document, and why was it so popular in Italy and also intriguingly in the Protestant Netherlands? Rembrandt, by the way, painted a scene from the story as well, although I didn't include it in my slides in my first set of lectures on Judith and Holofernes. What techniques does the artist use for dramatic effect, and where did she get these ideas? Where did she paint? Where did the fellow she got her ideas from paint? You might want to look back to the slide on Baroque art to remind yourself of some of the Baroque art techniques, because you've got one of those accept questions for this work. Okay, so think about the compositional elements of this painting. The brushwork, the horizon line, the stance of the subject. Who is he? How does the painting convey his power and authority? Okay, this set of works was not presented in class, and the PowerPoint is not up, alas. So I'm going to tell you more about it. The painting on top is in your textbook. The painting below is not. You should read the biographical information in your textbook carefully. You are going to get an accept question on her career. Also, pay attention to the date and the category in which this painting appears, since it is not typical of its genre, or at least of its art historical period. So how would you characterize this painting? Hint, there are 2 answers and they will be combined in the correct choice. It's actually not a hard question. But there is a hard, or I should say kind of unfair question. So I'm going to send you off to do some research. What else is this painter known for? Even a quick Wikipedia search will give you the answer and provide some more biographical detail that's actually not in your textbook and that you're going to need. Pay special attention to how this artist and her brothers and sisters were educated. That's a very broad hint. Okay, you need to know this work. This is another one of those, I won't say top 5, but it's probably in the top 20. Make sure you know the patron as well. It's not a familiar name. What was the ideological program? I would say ideological religious program behind this work, and much of the Baroque art outside of the Dutch Republic. Pretty broad hint there. So who's sitting in the box seats, those carved balconies on either side of this work? By the way, I did not, it was probably a mistake, I did not assign the Khan Academy podcast on this work. I was trying to cut back on your assignments. I should have, and I put those assignments together before I'd written the exam and looked back over past AP tests. So I would recommend that you either go back and watch the video segment on this work, that Power of Art video on Bernini, very good video, just a very good video on the Baroque in general. Or, this would be a lot shorter, that you watch the Khan Academy podcast on this work. It was not assigned, but it's easy to find. Just Google Khan Academy and the name of this work and it'll pop right up. Okay, this is another work that shows up repeated times on the AP test. I did not assign it as one of your PowerPoints since it was covered so thoroughly in the video. It's covered so thoroughly in your textbook, and you saw a Khan Academy podcast on the work. There's a reason for that overkill, though. You need to know this work thoroughly. The artist, the location, the time, the story, the techniques used to create drama. This was a very, very important painting in the history of art. If I had to list 5 must-know paintings from this course, this is one that would surely be on the list. Okay, make sure you know what a vanitas painting is. The painting, which is the painting on the left. The painting on the bottom right might otherwise be hard to identify, but you have the information you need on the PowerPoint that was posted on Google Drive, and it's also in your textbook back in the Rome section. Hint, hint. Think about what the works have in common and how they're different, especially in the medium used to produce the paintings. Notice that this is a very important artist from the College Board standpoint, and in art history, no one would disagree with that. Go to Rome, and he is everywhere. Designed, among other things, many of Rome's wonderful, over-the-top dramatic fountains. So he was an architect as well as a sculptor. You need to know his most famous works of architecture as well as sculpture. In fact, I would really recommend that you go back to the section of the textbook on this artist and look it over. It'll be good review for the AP exam as well. So how did his David differ from the others we've studied? And think about the general descriptions of Baroque art and particularly Baroque sculpture. These two examples are very typical in composition and intended effect. And really, this is the artist who more than any other defines Baroque sculpture. Okay, I thought this was one of the tougher AP image-based questions. I'll bet there were complaints from AP art history teachers about it, not least because the date question was unusually tough. You had to narrow down the answer to within 50 years, not the usual century. So you need to know that one. I've told you that flat out. You need to know what art historical period this represents, as well as all the other usual identifiers, patron, where it was painted, etc. What qualities identify it as belonging to its particular art historical period? Okay, good luck. In our next unit, we're going to get a break from quizzes, from multiple choice tests. I'm going to do a very short study guide just for a quick overview before our field trip, and we're going to have some fun teaching each other. I look forward to seeing you all in class while I'm going to open up the presentations. Good luck on the test.